Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem 497, He Strained My Faith. Now, in many ways, we are back to poem 315. You guys will remember that we played this game. He fumbles at your soul as players at the keys before they drop the full music on. He stuns you by degrees, prepares your brittle nature for the ethereal blow by faint hammers further heard, then nearer, then so slow your breath is time to straighten, your brain to bubble cool, deals one imperial thunderbolt that scalps your naked soul. When winds take forests in their paws, the universe is still. It is, I think, compelling that we come now to this poem, where again, Emily will play around with biblical allusions. Many have called this another theodicy. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side there, our playlist, Chats with Emily. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments where we talked about our big five, as we talk about them in 303. What does this text say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who you are, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then there's that last of the big five, theodicy, the question of suffering and pain, and the ways in which that pain or suffering has no value or some value. It's hard for Emily to always know exactly. The hope as well is that you've worked through the preceding 496 poems in our study together. We just finished with 496, As Far From Pity. And if you have, then you'll be able to place this poem alongside a number of other poems and poems to come as well. We'll possibly mention them. Emily is dealing, I think, with several biblical references here. One of those is John 13:23, where John, we are told, is the disciple that Jesus loved. She's going to reference John in this poem as herself. Emily argues that she has met, in this poem, every test that Christ has sent her. And in this regards, channeling the Matthew 4 story, where Jesus is met by the devil and has to meet these temptations. Some have read this poem even as a certain kind of what one scholar calls phallic rage. And there's a certain kind of sexual reading of this poem even, that I'm going to leave to you guys to kind of decide how you work with it. Although, it is interesting to take a look at the verbs of this poem. He strained my faith, did he find it supple? Shook my strong trust, did it then yield? Hurled my belief, but did he shatter it? Racked with suspense, not a nerve failed. Wrung me with anguish, but I never doubted him. Though for what wrong he did never say. Stabbed while I sued his sweet forgiveness. Jesus, it's your little John. Don't you know me? Now, Emily playing, of course, with the John 14:9 passage where Jesus speaks to Philip and says, don't you know me, Philip, even though I have been among you all this time. I think that this poem is a compelling theodicy, no doubt. In other words, I'm trying to believe, did I believe well enough? Let's see how he plays the game. He, possibly here, Jesus, he strained my faith. Again, this whole notion of being tested takes us back to the Matthew 4 passage. Did he find it supple? And obviously the rhetorical question is, yes, he did. He found that my faith was supple. And I think it's interesting to look at Emily the theologian. Again, we have so many prisms on Emily. Emily the theologian, and say, yeah, she does bend. She isn't rigid in her theological perspective. She says, yes, I was supple. And then she doesn't say he, but rather he shook my strong trust. Notice the word strong. Later it'll be faith, right? Strong trust. Early it was faith, and then later it will be this idea of looking for some kind of forgiveness. Did it then yield? And it seems like the rhetorical answer to this is no, I didn't yield. So yes, I was supple, but no, I didn't yield. And then he hurled, although she doesn't say he, hurled my belief. So notice we go from faith to trust to belief. But did he shatter it? You'll remember shatter from 3:23. And it seems like the answer to this rhetorically is again, no, it didn't shatter it. And then racked with suspense. I think this is a compelling line, Emily giving away to us the way she looks at her theology. Racked with suspense, not a nerve failed, exclamation point. In other words, no, I was strong. I took care of it. I was strong, right? And of course, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress is probably standing behind some of this stuff, as well as obviously Dante's Divine Comedy. And then she continues. So we go from strained to shook to hurled, even racked, wrung me with anguish. You'll remember back to 241, I like a look of agony because I know 'tis true. We're playing now with anguish. She's used this word a number of times in her poems. But I never doubted him, right? In other words, I was always consistent in my faith patterns. And, you know, again, our reading of these poems suggests, yeah, I'm not so sure that's all completely true. I mean, clearly Emily has her doubts. Here she says, I never doubted him, though, she says, for what wrong he did never say. Now we're to Job's theodicy, and I think this is what the text that really stands behind this. Like Job, she's wanting to know answers, and there's silence. She doesn't get an answer. Finishing now with stabbed. Again, notice how these words they could be interpreted sexually. Stabbed, while I sued his sweet forgiveness, sweet being used in 112 poems. It's quite remarkable. His sweet forgiveness, this idea of I gotta know why, but I also need to be forgiven. Of course, we could beg the question, if her faith was all that she is saying it, then why does she need forgiveness, right? Sweet forgiveness, and then all of a sudden a dash, and then all of a sudden she'll say who it is, who the he is. Jesus, dash, it's your little John. I told you the word little gets used in 172 poems. She loves to use this word. And then John with the exclamation point. Again, John taking us back to John 13:23. John is the disciple we're told that Jesus loved. It's your little John. And then she plays the Homeric game as well as the Christ game of don't you know me? And you'll remember in your studies of the book of the Gospels, in the book of John 14:9, that Jesus will ask this question. And of course, he'll say it or reference it a number of times. You'll remember in Gethsemane, he'll even make the observation to sleeping disciples. You know, why couldn't you stay with me? There's some of that tenor in this poem as well. And of course, we could call it Homeric. Obviously, Odysseus loves on his journeys to say that he's nobody. Of course, Emily herself in a classic, I'm nobody, who are you? And yet other times when he wants to make his proclamations as to who he is, nobody wants to believe him. You know, and it's almost like, don't you know me? He will want to say to Penelope at the end, we've given full lectures on the entire Odyssey at learnstrong.net. What's going on here at 2A? I think the argument is that it's hard to explain the challenge to faith. And it's hard to know how to respond to those challenges of faith. At 2B, well, the verbs here are stunning. Strained, shook, hurled, shattered, wrung, stabbed, right? At 3A, we mentioned a number of titles here, but I think the book of Job is the one. That's the theodicy of all theodicies, right? And of course, in the end, we never actually get in the book of Job exactly why it is that Job must go through all this pain, other than God says, I'm God and you're not. Finally, at 3B, to own a poem like this, what was a time when you felt challenged in your capacity to believe, to trust, to have faith? I hope Emily's challenging you. Thank you.